I will apologize up front that I've got the PowerPoint and it's basically there to help me. I do have PTSD, and if anyone knows anything about PTSD, the first thing to go is your memory. So I would have to have notes in front of me the whole time, but what I'll do is every once in a while I'll just glance up so I can keep myself on track to where I am. So my story that I want to share with you today starts in 2010. I was 31 years old when I got into policing. It was a second career for me. I was in banking, and then decided I wanted a greater challenge. I knew I was a person of high integrity, good morals, and I thought I would make an excellent police officer. So in 2010, I joined the Waterloo Regional Police Service, and I was working general patrol, which is what you do for the first few years of your career, and I can tell you it was the best job in the world. It was super exciting. Everything you did on the road, you had full control over how you did it. So every investigation you started, how you treated your victims and the complainants was entirely up to you, which allowed me to really put my own spin on everything. My PTSD comes from an incident when I was a recruit. I was only about 6 weeks on the job, and on the firing range there was an accident, and my colleague beside me almost died on the range. So it was something that happened very early in my career, and I've just had to try to deal with it, in a profession where it's not popular to deal with things like that. It's more, it was a training incident, suck it up, go on with your job. So I'm suffering the consequences now because that was 8 years ago. But that was how I started my career, so it was very much in your face. This is the career you chose, here you go. Just another picture. So what happened for me was 4 or 5 years into my career, that's when I started to notice some things that were happening internally that I wasn't comfortable with. So for starters, I knew that some of our internal investigations that were done by police, against police, were corrupt. There were negligent investigations. There were cases where officers were being arrested criminally, charged, but the investigation was built on nothing. There were other ones where the investigators would actually withhold evidence that would show the officer didn't commit the crime, but they'd let the officer go through the motions because they just wanted to get rid of that employee. And then there were other ones, and I was personally involved in one where I made a criminal allegation against another member of my service, and I watched it get swept under the rug. And that for me was my line in the sand. I said, I've had enough, I can't stand by and watch this happen. But when I started asking my colleagues, I'd only been there for 5 years. I started saying, is this the way it's done? Is this what happens here? And the response I got from everyone was just, that's how it is. Who are you to think you're ever going to change it? That's just how it is, right? It's always been this way. But I started thinking, I have to do something about it because this is who I am. It's one of those things we talk about with our passions, that nobody can stop you when you set your mind on something. So when I started looking at, an internal investigation, I thought, well, there must be a policy that's going to say, here's how we do an internal investigation. So I thought, if I can prove that these investigators are doing something wrong, then maybe they could get in trouble. We can solve this issue. But my service doesn't have a policy on how to conduct an internal investigation. So we have police officers investigating police officers that at one point in time might have been friends, they might have been foes, but there's nothing that outlines how they are to do that investigation. So I thought, well, there must be an oversight body. There must be someone that I can go to complain. And in Ontario, there is the Office of the Independent Police Review Director who does all of the complaints against police, but they don't accept complaints from police. So I am not allowed under law in Ontario to complain to this body. So I couldn't do that. So then I thought, well, if I was a member of the public and I wanted to complain about a member of Waterloo Regional Police Service, what do I do? So I started looking at internal policy. But again, you have to be a member of the public. If you're an officer, you can't make a complaint about another officer. So when you talk about the thin blue line, it's a pretty defined blue line, and it runs very deep. They make it so hard for an officer like myself who sees something, who wants to do the right thing, to actually do it. So I didn't know what else to do. So what I did was I made a presentation to the board. Anybody can go to the board and speak to the board, so that's what I did. I went there, it was actually, it was May of 2016. I sat at the table and I had my full 10 minutes and I just said to the board, you hired me in 2010 because you thought I was a person of high integrity, good morals. I've been here for 6 years and all I've seen is systemic corruption and a web of people who are willing to cover it up because they all want to see their next promotion. They all want to get up to those extremely high paying jobs with high status. I spoke for my 10 minutes and then I was cut off because I spoke too slow. But it was the end of the meeting when the media ran up to me and the one woman said, "Are you some kind of whistleblower?" And I hadn't heard that term before she said that. So when she said, "Are you some kind of whistleblower?" I thought, well, I don't know, maybe I am. We'll see what happens. And I legitimately thought that after that meeting, they were going to call me in, and I honestly felt like I'd be earmarked for leadership. I thought they would look at me and say, this person comes in, she's been here 5 years, and she has the guts to come and expose all this, knowing it could damage her career. But instead, a week later, I was brought in and I was sat down. I was told the chief doesn't want you to communicate with the board anymore, so that's a chief's directive. You now have to follow his order or you're insubordinate. I was told you're not going to be a use of force instructor anymore. We're going to take you out of your job. You're going to be put on a desk. We're going to put you in a basement office at headquarters where nobody can see you, nobody can talk to you. And I was put under investigation for 8 Police Service Act charges, and one of those was deceit. So my chief was alleging I was being deceitful, and if I was convicted of that, I could have lost my job. So that's when I realized, this is a lot more serious than I thought it was. I thought, I'm doing that courageous thing, I'm getting out there and I'm doing what I think is right, but now I realize they're going after my job. So over the course of 14 months, I was vilified. I was made to look like I did something wrong. It's not things that I exposed, it's me, there's something wrong with me. They tried to take an angle that I was romantically involved with one of the officers, and that was why I went there to do what I did, because they knew I was a single mother, so it was an easy target. Oh, she must be having a relationship with one of these guys, that's why she did this. And it just, over the course of 14 months, I was constructively dismissed. Could I have stayed? I guess I could have stayed, but I was staying to watch my legal bills accumulate while I'm fighting this discipline. I knew the end of the day they wanted to go after my job. So over the 14 months, I started doing my research. I started reading about other cases. I started reading the law to find out that really the law sets it up for this to happen. They don't want people like me to speak out because they don't want this to be revealed. I swore an oath of secrecy as a police officer, but that's to protect people like you. That's so that I can't say to my neighbor, hey, I arrested the guy across the street last week for impaired, he's a drunk. I can't do that, and I understand that I can't do that. But when I say, I'm put in this job to uphold the law, and now I'm going to do it, but it's against you, to me, that's not an oath of secrecy matter. That's my job. That's my oath of office. But I read through all these reports of previous cases where this had happened. Previous police whistleblowers had been disciplined. And there's case law, and I started reading case after case after case. And the result was what I called a research paper at the time. But I wrote a 93-page research paper that outlined all these cases and how prevalent this problem is. And in the end, when I resigned in July of 2017, I initially gave the MPPs a chance. I sent it to Justin Trudeau, I sent it to Kathleen Wynne, the Premier of Ontario, I sent it to all my MPPs. I gave them 2 months, and I didn't hear anything back from anybody. So when I had to resign to go public, but I did resign, I did go public, I released my report everywhere, and that's what I have since published into a book. But when I went public, I had all these people, it was almost dramatic. It was stranger than fiction. I had people saying, how can this be true? Is this real? Is what she's telling us true? And I cited all the cases in my book just to say, until you see them all in one place, you might think there's just these bad apples, there's just these things happening around. But when you start to piece it all together and you see that it's the chiefs that are doing this to their people and keeping these issues quiet, who are actually getting to the highest positions possible, that's when you start, as a taxpayer, starting to care about these issues. So I had quite a bit of media coverage when it first happened, but then again, because people think, this is almost too dramatic, this is too unreal, this can't be happening, it died off a little bit. But I went ahead, I published my book, it's on Amazon, I sell it on my website. And then in March, I've been going across Canada telling my story for organizations like the Conference Board, Canadian Institute, Institute of Public Administrators of Canada, Brantford Chamber of Commerce, the Center of Transformative Social Change, which is at Humber College, and then here today at One Woman. And it's basically just to say, I did it, even though I didn't know at the time I would lose my job, but it wouldn't have mattered, I still would have done what I did. And more people, there were 750 officers at my service, and I was the only one that wanted to do anything about it. So you've got these police officers who are out there doing this job saying, do what's right and follow the law, but they don't even do it themselves, and they don't even encourage it on the inside. So I've gone across Ontario. I've been presenting to police service boards to, again, share my story, but to promote accountability, transparency. Ontario just went through an entire rewrite of the policing legislation, and I visited the Ontario Legislature, and I told my story there, and I shared everything with them, and I said, this cannot happen again. If you want police that are accountable and transparent, and the public can trust them, then you cannot allow them to punish whistleblowers like myself. And I suggested very concrete changes to the proposed bill. I actually went twice. The second time I talked about the PTSD legislation because they want to now give the power to police chiefs to fire officers who are disabled. That was my second presentation. But as you can imagine, very little was changed to the bill, and the bill has now been passed. And not a lot's going to happen for people like myself down the road. It's going to continue to happen. So again, I talked about that thin blue line and what it really means. But I guess my message here today is to make sure that people understand that, you don't necessarily have officers on the road that are just willing to cover up for each other because they don't want their buddy to get in trouble. It is a systemic problem. And if you really start, there's a chapter in my book where I talk about why is the police culture what it is. Well, because you have police chiefs who have a high school education that are now making over $300,000, more than the Premier of Ontario. They have a personal vehicle that's paid for by the service. I mean, could you imagine having the opportunity to have that kind of wealth and power, right? Nobody would ever say anything to a chief of police. It's a debilitating authority when a police chief walks in the room. Everybody is petrified. Everyone will do whatever they're told. So you think about getting up to that level of status, and now you start to see why people are willing to step on each other to get up to that level. So in essence, I did what I'm calling, I crossed the thin blue line, because to me, it was worth it more for me to stand up for myself and my rights and my morals and everything else and everybody else versus allow this to just continue to happen. I probably could have achieved the rank of deputy chief or maybe the first female chief at Waterloo Regional Police, but it just wasn't worth it to me. I couldn't sacrifice who I was to get there. So I wanted to highlight some cases because I honestly believe that it's the women of the Ontario Police Services that are fighting for change. There's a woman in Windsor, Ontario that just came public and said that Windsor Police has systemic gender discrimination. She filed a human rights complaint. There's all of the women of Waterloo Regional Police, which is where I worked, filed a $167 million class action against Waterloo for gender discrimination, sexual harassment, and sexual assault. 2 weeks after the class action was launched, our chief was promoted to the president of the Ontario Association Chiefs of Police, the highest honor a chief of police can have in Ontario. So when you talk about things like the Me Too movement, we've got policing that works the complete opposite. It's almost like if you can be accused of the most egregious offenses, we'll promote you. It's the complete opposite. It doesn't work. There's no accountability. And then there's two women in Toronto. This is Heather McWilliams. She's a good friend of mine now, because when I came public, I started connecting with all these people around Ontario. She was alleging that at Toronto Police, there is systemic gender discrimination and sexual harassment. And when she first came out, again, a lot of people say, well, she's probably just disgruntled. She probably got turned over for a promotion, whatever. She's unhappy with her boss. But then shortly after, there was another sergeant at Toronto, and again, I'm good friends with her now, Jessica McInnes. She came out and said, no, it's the same thing, and it's everywhere. And when you have women that will take the stand and say, it's not happening here, it's probably because they were promised a promotion, promised a transfer. They know it's going to hurt their career if they do otherwise. So I just think it's pretty awesome that, when you look at the changes happening in Ontario specifically, it's all of us women that have had the courage to say anything. So I know it was said earlier by Dr. Houston about how we can get up here and speak and maybe you don't think you can ever do it. I kind of wanted to walk you through a little bit about what happens when you get up here. And I was always good at public speaking, but since PTSD, it's gotten that much harder because now I have increased anxiety, increased everything else. It just makes it that much harder. But I thought, I don't know, we don't ever really talk about what exactly is happening within our bodies when we come up to do something like this. So we talk about what do you have thinking in your mind when you're about to take the stage to do a talk like this. Obviously you have stress, you have anxiety, sometimes insomnia, nights leading up to your presentation that's going to affect your sleep. You're not going to sleep well. You're not going to have an appetite. You're going to know that you need to eat because you need the energy, but it's just not there. The only reason I'm doing this is because I'm trying to explain, I was a firearms instructor before I resigned, so I would talk on the range all about this fight or flight instinct. We all have it. It's not just first responders, but what you're getting when you get this nervous feeling is your fight or flight instinct. So what is happening in your body is that your body is literally thinking, I'm about to die, I need to start protecting myself. Because you're making it think you're going to be in such a stressful situation. So all the blood is rushing right now to your core organs. It's trying to protect your heart, your lungs, your stomach, everything else. So you lose your dexterity, so you start to shake a little bit. That's one of the first things. You don't have your fine motor skills. That's why your legs get shaky, because there isn't a lot of blood down there. It's all right here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I'm not superhuman. I deal with it probably worse than some of you right now because of the situation I'm in. But I have to get through it. So what do I do? So leading up to it, my heart's racing, my breathing gets really, really shallow, my mouth is getting dry, I start to sweat, and my face sometimes can get flushed because, again, your blood's all right here. Nobody can fight this. Nobody is superhuman. But obviously, you start with the breathing. So it's just long, deliberate breaths. So On the shooting range, when I try to get the officers to calm down, it's deliberate breaths. It's when you don't think you need a breath, but you're forcing air into your lungs. So you're literally sucking air in when you don't think you have any room left. And anyone that does yoga, you're gonna know, get it right down there deep and just keep forcing the oxygen in. And if you start practicing this at home, think of a stressful situation that you could be in and start going through this routine, you're gonna train your body to lessen those symptoms, so that if you ever do get an opportunity to do this, you're gonna say, as long as I go through my checklist, I'm okay. So you're gonna start with the breathing. Don't ever skip a meal. So if you know you have something, have a glass of juice, have something, because your body's gonna need that energy. Again, drink lots of water. So stress will make your mouth incredibly dry. That's why I brought it up here. I didn't know if I'd need it, but it will intentionally make your mouth dry. It's not just the talking, it's the stress. And don't make, I put that up there because when we have an issue, anytime, whether it's work or your personal life, and you have a difficult conversation that you have to have, as women, we tend to, maybe when they did that to me, they didn't really mean it. And we talk about, when you're being walked all over, we're so kind that we want to look at the abuser and think that, well, maybe they didn't really mean it, or, maybe they're just going to realize on their own that they did something wrong, and then I won't have to address the issue myself. But it's realizing that the person that did something to you believes they can get away with it. It's all that what you're willing to put up with is going to happen to you, right? So we have to stop making excuses for the people that are doing wrong to us. We need to start taking that control back. And we talked about mantras. Dr. Houston talked about mantra. I have a mantra for everything, but every situation in my life, whether it's my kids, whether it's my ex, I have a mantra. I'm a good person. I deserve to be happy. I deserve to be healthy. Everything that I do, there's a mantra in my head because I'm training my thinking to prepare me for moments like this. So the first thing I do is my mantra, my thinking. Then it's my breathing. Then it's making sure I'm drinking and I'm eating lots of water and food. But these are all how we become superhuman when we're doing things like this. So I put this up there because I know that growing up, I didn't have a mentor. And I think that for me, I struggled a lot with, I knew in my heart what I thought was right and what was wrong, but I didn't have a path that I could follow. I didn't have someone that I looked up to. And ever since I started finding people, whether it's coming to events like this and then following them on social media, or hearing about a book and reading the book, I start really following that person's path, and I start seeing things in their lives that I want to emulate in my life. And I guess I put this up there just to say, take the time, if you haven't thought much about it, especially for the younger women, take the time to find someone you really relate to that you can, they can mentor you and you can be their mentee. What I'm doing as just a trial is I'm doing a 30-day free program where I'm also experimenting a little bit just to connect women and build those mentoring relationships through this online platform. So you'll see my website at the end if you want to check that out. But I've got my personal site. My personal site was developed because I've got, the advocate side of me, and then I've got the business side of me, and I'm trying to keep them somewhat separate. But my personal website talks about my journey and what I've done and different videos and things like that. And then my business site is at the bottom. And I used Fit for Duty because in the time that I was in policing, I was surrounded by a lot of people who were physically fit for duty. But I learned that, if you're not ethically fit, you really don't belong there. So fit for duty means a lot more than just having muscle and, being healthy. But please connect with me on social media because it's the best way to keep up to date on things and for me to keep in touch with you. But basically, that was my message today, was to say that, it doesn't matter the cost. You know that if it's the right thing to do, it's always going to be the right thing to do. And John Lewis is one of my mentors. He doesn't know it, but he is. But he's a senator in Georgia. I love him. And everything, he's all about being the whistleblower and doing what's right. But, it has to always be, we always have to be following what we know is right. Because if I'm only one person, and I would have wished that when I spoke up, a lot of other people would have joined me. And it is happening, but when you look at the number of people that know certain things are going on and are not willing to stand up for it, it just blows my mind. Because we're never going to make changes, especially in something like policing, unless more people start to do it. So my whole talk about what's happening with your body was try to get more women to say, it is going to suck, it's going to be incredibly stressful, but if I'm going to go and do this, I know that physiologically I can do it. And I'm going to take those tools, I'm going to utilize them, and I'm going to go ahead and speak out. So I hope I've inspired you. Thank you.
Kelly Donovan.